The United States is usually pictured as a mainland. Cities, highways, national parks. But scattered off its coasts and inside its rivers and bays are thousands of islands, and some of them were never meant for visitors. Some were chosen precisely because they were hard to reach and easy to forget. This list has a town of 360 people that the Chesapeake Bay swallowed 1 foot at a time until the last house cracked at the spine and fell into the water. A forbidden island inside New York City where a healthy woman was locked away for 23 years. A frozen harbor island where hundreds died in a single winter, now buried under a sewage plant. And at number 1, a peninsula sealed behind 2,000-foot sea cliffs, where for over a century people were seized, torn from their families, and shipped in to die. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because that one is number 1 on this list. This is Hidden Shores, where we dig up the history behind the places nobody talks about. If you have not subscribed, now is the time. We post a story like this every week. Today we are counting down 12 U.S. islands hiding dark histories no one talks about. Number 12, Holland Island. The island that drowned. In the middle of Chesapeake Bay, off Maryland, there used to be a town. Around 1910, Holland Island was one of the largest inhabited islands in the bay, about 360 people, 2 stores, a school, and a baseball team that traveled to other islands by boat. The problem was the ground itself. The island was silt and clay, not rock. The bay was rising, the land was sinking, and every year the water took a little more shore. After a 1918 storm wrecked the church, the last families gave up by 1922. Many took their houses with them, taking them apart board by board, floating them across the bay, and rebuilding them in mainland towns like Cambridge and Crisfield. One house stayed. In 1995, a former waterman and minister named Stephen White bought it, and most of the island, for about $70,000. For 15 years, he fought the bay with timbers, rocks, sandbags, and a sunken barge. In its final years, that lone Victorian seemed to rise straight out of open water at high tide, standing alone in the middle of the bay, the most photographed ghost house in Maryland. In October 2010, it cracked at the spine and fell in. By 2012, the island was gone. A whole town packed up and floated itself home. One man stayed behind to lose an argument with the sea. Number 11, Polypel Island, the arsenal that blew itself apart. There is a Scottish castle in the middle of the Hudson River, about 50 miles north of New York City. It was never a home. It was a warehouse for guns. The island is called Polypel, and long before anyone built on it, Hudson Valley tribes reportedly avoided the place, believing it was haunted. That did not deter Francis Bannerman VI, who quit school at 14 during the Civil War to sell military scrap and grew into the largest surplus arms dealer on the East Coast. After the Spanish-American War, he bought up roughly 90% of all captured Spanish weapons, and he needed somewhere far from Manhattan to put them. His son spotted the uninhabited island from a canoe. Bannerman bought it in 1900 and spent 18 years building a turreted castle to hold millions of rounds of ammunition, with the words Bannerman's Island Arsenal spelled out in raised relief on the wall, half fortress, half advertisement. Bannerman died in 1918. The family lost interest. And in August 1920, the neglected powder magazine went up. More than 200 pounds of shells and powder detonated, throwing sections of castle wall clear across the river onto the railroad tracks on the far bank. People felt it in towns miles away. A fire gutted what remained in 1969. Today, the stabilized ruin still stands, and a trust runs boat tours in the warm months. A man built a fortress to keep his weapons safe, and the weapons brought the fortress down. Number 10. McNeil Island, America's last prison island. 3 miles across the cold water of Puget Sound in Washington State sits an island you cannot visit. There is no bridge. You reach it by boat or by plane, or you do not reach it at all. For 136 years, McNeil Island was a working prison. It opened in 1875 as a territorial prison before Washington was even a state, and ran continuously as a territorial, then federal, then state facility, a rare prison to span all 3. It outlasted Alcatraz by decades. In the early years, Transport was by rowboat until a guard and 2 prisoners built a 24-foot sloop in the 1880s to make the supply runs safer. A small town grew up around the prison. Corrections families lived on the island. Their children grew up there, swimming and roaming the woods, neighbors with men serving 15 to life. The isolation that made it secure also made it expensive, roughly $1,200 more per inmate each year than mainland prisons. When budget cuts came in 2010, the state finally closed it. In April 2011, the last island prison in America shut its doors. But the island did not empty out. Here's the thing. The only people left on McNeil today are some of the state's most dangerous sex offenders, held under civil commitment after their sentences end, confined indefinitely in a legal gray zone. Dozens of old prison buildings sit rotting nearby, and boats are still barred from coming within 100 feet of the shore. A prison that closed but never let anyone go home. Number 9. Plum Island. The government germ lab you're not allowed to visit. Off the eastern tip of Long Island, about 7 miles across the water from a town called Lyme, Connecticut, there is a small island the public has not been allowed to set foot on for decades. Since 1954, it has held the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, a restricted federal facility that studies dangerous livestock diseases like foot and mouth disease. The work is real, and on paper it is straightforward. Keep catastrophic animal diseases out of the American food supply. But everything about the place looks suspicious. A secret government germ lab on a closed island. A short boat ride from the town that gave Lyme disease its name. That combination has fed decades of conspiracy theories, that the lab created Lyme disease as a weapon, that it produced the so-called Montauk monster, that ticks escaped from its labs. It is worth being clear. Mainstream scientists reject the Lyme disease theory. The bacteria that causes it has been found in specimens far older than the lab, including ancient remains. The kernel that keeps the rumors alive is that in the lab's early years, the Army really was interested in agents that could attack enemy livestock, and a 2004 book spun that into a full secret bioweapon narrative. The theory has proven impossible to kill. In 2019, the U.S. House of Representatives passed an amendment by unanimous voice vote, formally asking the Pentagon to disclose whether it had ever released weaponized ticks from sites including Plum Island. Congress had to go on record about weaponized ticks. That tells you how powerful a closed island and a locked gate can be. Number 8. Penikese Island. The leper island they dynamited. In 1904, Massachusetts had a problem nobody wanted in their backyard. The state needed somewhere to put people with leprosy, and when it tried to choose a mainland site, the opposition was so fierce that a special train had to be added to carry protesting Cape Codders to the State House. So the state went where no one could object. It bought Penikese, a 74-acre rock at the exposed western end of the Elizabeth Islands in Buzzards Bay, for $25,000. In 1905, the Penikese Island Leper Hospital opened with 5 patients. It was only the second leprosy hospital in the entire country. Over 16 years, 36 patients lived there, around 14 at a time. Many were immigrants who barely spoke English, sent to live out their lives in exile. A doctor named Frank Parker and his wife Marion ran the place and by most accounts tried hard to make it humane. One young patient named Archie became the colony's only link to the outside world through a donated 2-way radio. When he died in 1915, no one else knew how to operate it, and the island went quiet. In 1921, the governor closed the colony and shipped the last patients to an unfinished federal hospital in Louisiana, far from their families. Then the state did something telling. It burned the buildings down, and then it dynamited what was left. Today, almost nothing remains but stone gateposts and a small hilltop cemetery. They did not just close the island, they tried to erase that it had ever existed. Number 7. Pea Patch Island, the Union's Andersonville. In the middle of the Delaware River, near Delaware City, sits a flat, marshy island with a massive stone fort on it. Fort Delaware was built to defend Philadelphia. It was never designed to be a prison. The Civil War changed that. After the 1862 Battle of Kernstown brought the first 250 Confederate captives, the Union realized that an island ringed by river was a natural cage. After Gettysburg in 1863, the prisoner population exploded past 12,000, far beyond anything the place could handle. More than 30,000 Confederate prisoners would pass through over the course of the war. The conditions matched the worst of the era. The compound sat on low, swampy, mosquito-bred ground with bad drinking water, and disease tore through it. Smallpox, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, scurvy, pneumonia. Over a single 3-month stretch, illness killed more than 12% of the prison population. Prisoners came to call the place their Devil's Island, and historians have compared it to the notorious Confederate camp at Andersonville. About 2,500 men died here. The island's high water table made burial there impractical, so most of the dead were ferried across the river to Finns Point, New Jersey, and buried a dozen at a time in pits. Today, Fort Delaware is a state park with reenactors and cannon firings, and in the brick rooms where the first prisoners were held, you can still read their names, scratched into the walls by men who did not know if they would leave. The cannons were never the deadly part. The water, the swamp, and the crowding did the killing. We are halfway through, and from here the tone shifts. If you are finding this interesting, hit the like button and tell us in the comments which of these islands you had never heard of before. We read every one. The next 6 are the ones people don't talk about for a reason. Number 6. Hart Island, the largest mass grave in America. On a thin, mile-long strip of land in Long Island Sound, just off the Bronx, lie roughly 1 million bodies. It is the largest mass grave in the United States, and most people who live a few miles away have never heard of it. New York City bought the island in 1868 and began burying its dead there the next year. The first was a 24-year-old orphan named Louisa Van Slyke, who died alone of yellow fever in 1869. She would have a great deal of company. Since then, an estimated 1 million people have been buried on Hart Island, the unclaimed, the unidentified, and the too poor to afford a funeral. The exact number can never be known. A fire destroyed records, and at times graves were even reused once the bodies had decomposed. For generations, the place was effectively sealed. No headstones, no visitors. The dead were buried in plain pine coffins, stacked 3 deep in long trenches, up to 150 adults or 1,000 infants at a time, each group marked by a single white post. And the people doing the digging were prisoners. For most of its modern history, inmates from Rikers Island have carried out the burials, historically paid about 50 cents an hour. The island has worn many other faces: a Civil War prison camp, a workhouse, an asylum, a tuberculosis ward, a Cold War missile base. In the 1980s and 90s, it became the single largest burial ground in the country for people who died of AIDS. The first child to die of AIDS in New York City is buried there alone, 14 feet down. For decades, parents were legally barred from visiting their own children's graves on that island. 1 million people, and for most of them, the last hands to touch the coffin belonged to a stranger doing time. Number 5. Egmont Key. The island that's erasing its own crime. At the mouth of Tampa Bay in Florida, there is a small sandy island with a lighthouse and clear water, reachable only by boat. Day trippers ride the ferry over for the beach. Most have no idea what the ground beneath them was used for. In 1857, in the last of the Seminole Wars, the U.S. Army built a stockade on Egmont Key. As soldiers forced the Seminole out of Florida, they needed a holding pen escape-proof in a way the swamps were not, and a sandy island at the bay's mouth was perfect. Captives taken near Fort Myers were loaded onto a steamer, held on the key, then shipped west through New Orleans toward the reservations. For many, it was one of the last stops on the Trail of Tears. Around 300 Seminoles were held there, possibly more. Disease and suicide took lives, and the dead were buried in unmarked graves whose number no one knows. The tribe has described the place as a concentration camp and given it names of their own: the Dark Place and Our Alcatraz. Because the Army left only manifests and lists, the human story was nearly lost. And now there is a second erasure underway. The island is dissolving into the Gulf. Dredging, storms, and rising seas have cut it roughly in half since 1875. Gun batteries that once sat well inland now lie submerged hundreds of feet offshore. The Seminole tribe is now racing the water, surveying the island to document what happened before the evidence is gone for good. The island that was used to make a people disappear is now disappearing itself, and it may take the graves with it. Number 4. North Brother Island. Typhoid Mary's Prison Island. There is an abandoned island in the East River between the Bronx and Rikers Island that almost no one is allowed to set foot on. From the water you can see brick buildings being slowly strangled by trees. It is a ruin in the middle of the largest city in America. In the 1880s, New York turned this 20-acre island into a quarantine colony. Riverside Hospital was moved here to isolate people with contagious diseases: smallpox, typhus, tuberculosis, yellow fever. In effect, it became its own small town, with a morgue, a school, and tennis courts. Its most famous resident never felt sick a day in her life. Mary Mallon, Typhoid Mary, was the first documented healthy carrier of typhoid in the United States. She was quarantined here in 1907, released after 3 years, and then, after she went back to cooking under a false name, forcibly returned in 1915. She stayed for 23 years, until she died on the island in 1938, still insisting she had done nothing wrong. After her death, her cottage was demolished. Officials decided it was too dangerous to live in, and the island carries another tragedy. In 1904, the steamship General Slocum caught fire in the water right beside it. More than 1,000 people died, the deadliest day in New York City until September 11th, and the dead and dying were brought ashore here. After the hospital closed, the island held veterans housing, then a youth drug rehab center, and was finally abandoned in the 1960s. Today it is a protected bird sanctuary, off limits to the public. The buildings are collapsing into the woods. A whole island built to keep the city safe, now a secret the city keeps from itself. Number 3. Sullivan's Island. The other Ellis Island. Today, Sullivan's Island is a quiet, wealthy beach town outside Charleston, South Carolina. Beaches, sea oats, expensive homes. It is one of the most pleasant places on the Carolina coast. It is also one of the most important and least acknowledged sites in American history. Charleston was the largest slave trading port in North America. By many estimates, around 40% of the roughly 400,000 enslaved Africans brought to British North America entered through the Charleston area. And before they were sold, many were held on Sullivan's Island. Here's the wild part. The island held pest houses, quarantine stations, where Africans who had just survived the Middle Passage were confined for 10 to 40 days, checked for disease, sometimes fattened to fetch a higher price, before being rowed to the city and sold at auction. For this reason, the island has been called the Ellis Island of Black America, though the comparison is uneasy. The people who passed through Ellis Island came by choice. The history was nearly buried. For generations, tour captains and brochures skipped it entirely. It took historians and the writer Toni Morrison to force it back into public memory. In 1989, Morrison pointed out that there was no memorial here at all, no plaque, no wall, no bench. In 2008, the Toni Morrison Society finally placed a single bench near the site. It is estimated that more than half of all African Americans alive today have an ancestor who first touched this continent on this one small island. A place that shaped half a nation's family tree, marked for decades by nothing at all. Number 2. Deer Island, where a genocide became a sewage plant. In the winter of 1675, hundreds of people were taken to a barren island in Boston Harbor and left there to freeze. They were Native Americans, mostly Nipmuc from the town of Natick, who had converted to Christianity and lived peacefully alongside the colonists. They were known as the Praying Indians. When King Philip's War broke out, the bloodiest conflict per capita in American history, the colonists turned on them anyway, afraid they might side with the enemy. In October 1675, the Massachusetts Council ordered them rounded up and dumped on Deer Island for the winter with almost no food or shelter. Estimates of how many were interned range from around 500 to more than 1,000. Roughly half of them died of starvation, of exposure, of disease over a single winter. Some of the survivors were sold into slavery in the West Indies. The communities they came from never recovered, and for centuries the whole episode stayed largely invisible in Boston's memory. The island's later history only deepened the grimness. During the Irish famine, it became an immigrant quarantine where more than 800 people died. then a prison. And today, the ground where hundreds of native people froze to death is the site of Boston's massive wastewater treatment plant. Its giant egg-shaped digesters now part of the skyline. In the 1990s, when the plant was being built, the local water authority moved soil off the island, soil that reportedly contained human remains, and dumped it in a quarry. Every year, the descendant tribes paddle back through the harbor to remember the dead, to a working sewage plant because that is where their ancestors still lie. Number 1, Kalaupapa, the place of the living dead. You come down by mule, or on foot, or in a tiny plane that holds about 9 people. There is no road in. The trail switchbacks down a wall of green cliffs that drop 2,000 feet straight to the Pacific, and at the bottom, the land flattens into a quiet green peninsula with the ocean pounding on 3 sides. It is one of the most beautiful places in Hawaii. It is silent in a way that feels deliberate. And then you reach the graves, thousands of them, most unmarked, spread across the fields as if the place itself were made of the dead. This is the Kalaupapa Peninsula on the north shore of Molokai. For over a century, it was a prison without walls because it did not need them. The cliffs and the ocean were the walls. In 1865 and 1866, the Kingdom of Hawaii passed laws allowing anyone diagnosed with leprosy to be seized and removed for life. The disease had reached the islands, and native Hawaiians, with no immunity, were dying. With no cure and a great deal of fear, the kingdom chose the most isolating place it could find and made banishment there the law. The first 12 exiles arrived in January 1866. Over the years, more than 8,000 people were shipped here. Bounty hunters were paid to find the sick and bring them in. Families were torn apart. Children as young as 13 were sent in, most believing correctly that they would never go home. An estimated 8,000 people are buried on the peninsula, the vast majority with no name on the grave. Into that despair, in 1873 came a Belgian priest named Father Damien. He chose to live among the exiled when no one else would. He built houses and a church, he dressed wounds, he made coffins. Eventually, he contracted leprosy himself, and he died here in 1889. In 2009, he was made a saint. Forced isolation did not truly end until 1949, and the law itself stayed on the books until 1969. Since 1977, any patient who wanted to stay has been guaranteed the right to remain for life, and here's the detail that stops people cold. Some of them stayed. A handful of elderly former patients still live there by choice. Sent to a place to die, they made it the only home they had, and they would not leave it. The cliffs that were built to seal people in are now the thing that protects them. The island told them they were already gone. They are still there. 12 islands off 12 different shores, all chosen for the same reason. The water kept whatever happened there out of sight. For me, the one that stays is Kalaupapa. People sent there to die who decided to call it home and never left. Tell us in the comments which island surprised you most, or which one we missed. And if this is the history you came for, subscribe to Hidden Shores. There are more waiting on every coast.